In the women's prison shower, there's a mysterious woman who wears a collar even while bathing. She has an elegant aura and rarely speaks, yet the other inmates are terrified of her. You see, her hair is constantly dripping an ink-like liquid, its dye meant to conceal her identity. It's only when the black ink flows down her snow-white back that it draws everyone's attention. She slowly turns around, her deep eyes sending a shiver down one's spine. She has long grown accustomed to the strange looks from everyone, because she is none other than the daughter of Magneto, Polaris. As for why she's in prison, I'll get to that later. First, let's look at her abilities and methods. Polaris perfectly inherited her father's superpowers, able to control the magnetic fields around her at will. Any metal in her hands becomes a deadly weapon. If someone accidentally provokes her, they can only blame their own bad luck. Like this clueless young man, for example. Knowing Polaris was a mutant, he still wanted her to show off her powers. Naturally, Polaris didn't refuse. Green sparks appeared in her hands, and the sports car outside the window immediately flew into the air, leaving the young man stunned, his jaw dropping in amazement. But he celebrated too soon. Polaris suddenly used her power to slam the car to the ground, sending it to the scrapyard ahead of schedule. "Oh, my car, you're crazy," Polaris sneered as if to say, "This is the price for daring to challenge me." But no matter how talented she was still at the bottom of society, living every day on the run. In a world where mutants live alongside humans, her very existence was a crime. Surrounded by the police, Polaris had no intention of surrendering. With a powerful twist of her hands, she instantly destroyed all the police cars. She thought they would back off, but they attacked even more fiercely, firing wildly. Reluctantly, Polaris had to use her powers again, disarming 2 officers. Although she could control the bullet's trajectory, she didn't want to kill anyone, and could only use the police cars to hold them off. But this wasn't a long-term solution. Luckily, her boyfriend appeared at that moment. A dazzling white light shot from his hands, blinding the police. The group took the opportunity to escape the factory, but unexpectedly a remaining officer shot them from behind. Her boyfriend was injured and fell. Seeing this, Polaris lost control. They had tried to restrain themselves, not wanting to escalate the conflict, but what about them? The more she thought, the angrier she got, unleashing her fury with her powers. Her boyfriend reminded her not to linger, but in her rage, Polaris couldn't listen. She used all her strength to slam the officer into a dumpster, but then she herself was hit by a taser and lost her ability to fight. Just like that, she was sent to prison. What was more infuriating was that the police had clearly shot first, yet she was charged with attempted murder. Coupled with the harsh penalties for mutants, this was tantamount to a death sentence. But Polaris remained calm. Even when the prosecutor pretended to be kind, saying her sentence would be reduced if she revealed her accomplices, she just scoffed. To her, death had now become a form of liberation. She told him to get lost. Unexpectedly, the prosecutor foolishly stepped into her glass enclosure. Polaris smirked. "Didn't you say I tried to kill someone? Let me show you what attempted murder feels like." She sensed the steel pin in the prosecutor's knee and controlled it, making it twist inside his body, causing him to grit his teeth in agony. "Trust me, if I wanted to kill those cops, they wouldn't have survived." But the prosecutor confidently pulled out a report. Polaris's face immediately changed. She couldn't believe the prosecutor was despicable enough to use her unborn child to force her to comply. Trapped, she completely broke down. Why would you do that? Her reckless action also led to a harsher punishment. She was transferred to a notorious prison. As soon as Polaris entered, someone spat in her face, looking smug afterward. Polaris was about to teach the inmate a lesson, but was stopped by a guard. Passing another cell, she saw a person who was completely white, also wearing a collar. Polaris knew he must be a mutant too. Though she had many questions, it wasn't a good time to ask. Back in her cell, Polaris carefully observed her surroundings. There were iron objects everywhere. Even the toilet was made of iron. She almost laughed out loud. This was practically her personal armory. Polaris immediately used her powers, preparing to attack, but was suddenly hit by a shock and stunned. Could it be that her inherited powers weren't working? She struggled to her feet, about to ask someone, but heard the cruel laughter of the inmates. Only the female inmate across from her took pity and told her the truth. It turned out the collar on her neck was a special device for mutants that could suppress their powers. She also said no mutant who entered here ever left alive. Before, Polaris would have scoffed, but now for the sake of her unborn child, she had to find a way to survive and escape. So she deliberately tried to befriend the white-skinned woman during mealtime, hoping to get information about the collar. But the woman looked around nervously as if afraid of something, then got up and left as if she had seen a ghost, warning Polaris to stay away from her. Seeing the menacing glare of a bully, Polaris immediately understood. It seemed the woman was being bullied. She would have to find another way. During yard time, Polaris carefully observed the prison's layout. The walls were 10 meters high with guards patrolling around. Without her powers, escape was clearly impossible. As she was looking for an opportunity, she was called over by the bully. She arrogantly demanded that Polaris shine her shoes. How could someone as proud as Polaris bow down to her? Hearing her refusal, the bully jumped up in anger. "Trust me, I can make you obey. Outside you have superpowers, but in here I have the power." Polaris didn't back down. She mocked her back. "Your face looks like the surface of the moon, a masterpiece of a mutant." This made the bully's teeth itch with rage, but Polaris was only thinking about escaping and didn't bother with her. She turned to walk away, but the bully's lackey attacked from behind. Punches rained down on Polaris's face. Seeing her bleeding from her nose and mouth, the bully became even more arrogant. "I heard you're pregnant. Let's see how strong this mutant baby is." For her child, Polaris's maternal strength kicked in, and she finally stopped holding back. Despite the pain from the electric collar, she activated her powers, slamming the bully into the fence. Before she could rest, she was ganged up on by the lackeys. The yard was full of inmates, but they just sighed. What was more infuriating was that they had clearly started the fight, but the guards, without distinguishing right from wrong, threw Polaris into solitary confinement. Was it just because she was a mutant that she deserved this unfair treatment? Like a dog, she wore a collar that restrained her will every day and had to endure the cold environment. Pain and humiliation came at once. She could only rely on her last bit of willpower to get through this difficult time. But even so, the police wouldn't let her go, demanding Polaris reveal the whereabouts of the baby's father, so the whole family could be reunited in prison. If not, they would cause her to miscarry. The thought of her tiny unborn child being used as a hostage enraged Polaris even more. She told herself to overcome the fear of the collar and activated her powers to break out. At that moment, the collar emitted an urgent warning, as if telling her not to do something foolish. But Polaris was unyielding. She endured the pain and once again challenged her fate. "Come on. I'm begging you." The iron door opened, but her strength was depleted. Her legs trembled uncontrollably. She only had enough strength to crawl out. She didn't get far before fainting from exhaustion. In her dream, she returned to the days she was in love with her boyfriend. Polaris danced a beautiful waltz in midair. Eclipse smashed a wine bottle on the ground using the glass shards to create beautiful sparks of light. When their fingers touched, a beautiful aurora appeared before them. It was the chemical reaction between light and magnetism. They met and shared a kiss under the aurora. But it was all just a dream. Her escape plan was thwarted when the guards arrived. How tragic. To prevent Polaris from escaping again, the prison decided to transfer her to a special facility. Learning from the last time, this prison transport was equipped with special iron doors made of reinforced glass, and she was restrained hand and foot. There were no metal objects inside the vehicle. They really went to great lengths. But to her surprise, the prosecutor who had used her baby to blackmail her had also become a prisoner. The prosecutor apologized for his past actions and suggested they cooperate to escape. At first, Polaris didn't trust him, but thinking of her unborn child, she temporarily set aside her doubts. The prosecutor said he had arranged for people to rescue them. They just needed to wait for the right moment. Soon, the opportunity came. The prison transport suddenly collided with something, causing a violent jolt. The agents immediately ordered a lockdown of the scene, and all police forces swarmed in. The mutants didn't expect such a large number of opponents and could only send an invisible person to help. But before this person could even approach the vehicle, his powers failed. Just as he tried to escape, he was shot down by the police. Eclipse grew anxious seeing the dangerous situation. Not only were his powers gone, but so were all the other mutants. Looking around, they discovered it was one of their own interfering. This was a deceased teammate who had the ability to block the powers of all mutants. In this situation, Eclipse had to use a gun to draw the enemy's fire, risking his life to create an opportunity for Polaris. At the same time, the guards received orders to move the prisoner. Polaris knew the time had come. As soon as the restraints were opened, the two of them launched a surprise attack. But now, with only two of them and their hands still tied, how could they be a match for the guards? Soon they were overpowered and locked up again. To make matters worse, Eclipse ran out of bullets. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't activate his superpowers. In desperation, a teammate named Ahab rushed forward and took down a guard, knocking the gun from his hand. With superior skills, he quickly defeated the guards and rushed to stop the source of the power-disrupting pulse. Instantly, Polaris felt her powers return, but there was nothing metal to use. At that moment, the prosecutor seemed to remember something. "My leg, the metal in my leg, what are you waiting for? Take it." Seeing his determined eyes, Polaris didn't hesitate. She immediately activated her powers, pulling the pin out of his leg. She then used the pin to open her restraints. Seeing this, the panicked guards immediately called for backup, but it was too late. With a wave of her hand, there was a loud bang, and the back door of the prison transport burst open. Polaris stepped out majestically. The agents fired frantically, but they forgot that bullets are also made of metal. Polaris simply held out her hand, and the bullets immediately shot backward. Then she raised both hands and everyone was disarmed. The agents had to order a retreat. Polaris hugged Eclipse tightly in a happy reunion. But this was not the time to reminisce. Ahab had sensed drones approaching. To buy them time to escape, Eclipse once again decided to stay behind, but this time, Polaris didn't want to be separated from him again. "If you go, I go." Seeing this, Eclipse had to concede and arrange to meet at the base. However, trouble came faster than they thought. Polaris tried to use her powers to shoot down the drones, but found they were beyond her control. Eclipse's powers could attack, but had difficulty pinpointing their exact location. Just then, Polaris thought of a wow. Wait, she removed the car's rearview mirror and let it float out the window. Finally, they could see. Eclipse used his powers, and relying on the reflection of the light, they easily shot down the drones. But their joy was short-lived. They found the road ahead was blocked. Eclipse immediately wanted to change direction, but Polaris took control of the steering wheel and continued driving forward. The car only stopped right in front of the police. The agent thought they had surrendered, but things weren't that simple. Polaris stepped out of the car with a calm expression. She completely ignored the coming attack. Then the agent's gun was in her hand. "Honey, we have to go now." "Of course we have to go, but we have to take him with us." Then Polaris took him to an abandoned factory, using the rebar from a pillar to tighten around his neck. "Don't you like putting collars on others? Now you can see how it feels." If Polaris didn't still need him, today would have been his last. He really likes to torture people. I think he should get a taste of his own medicine. You heard that right. Our main focus is revenge. But it wasn't over. He had used her unborn child to coerce a confession. This was a big deal. Although he didn't have a child in his belly, Polaris always had unique ideas. She called her teammate to perform a memory scan. You need to know, this process is not something an ordinary person can endure. To find useful clues, you have to rearrange all the memories. Who doesn't have painful memories? Looking at the bald man's expression, you could tell how much pain he was in. Polaris thought good things were coming, but she didn't expect the bald man's comrades to arrive so quickly. Hundreds of police surrounded them. To buy Dreamer time, Polaris used her powers. She lifted her hand and dozens of steel bars floated in the air. On her command, the bars shot out the window, all of them, embedding themselves in the police cars. The soldiers, who had never seen such a thing, ducked for cover. Obviously, Polaris wanted to give them a taste of what's to come. But the police captain wasn't a fool. Though he didn't rush to attack, he came up with a countermeasure, ordering his team members to wear gas masks and start launching tear gas. Inside, thick smoke immediately filled the room. Seeing the situation was unsalvageable, they had to retreat first. But their efforts were not in vain. Based on fragments of the bald man's memory, Dreamer simulated a building where it seemed many people like them were being held captive. To find out more, Polaris disguised herself as a lost girl to attract the guards. The two guards thought they had hit the jackpot, so happy they couldn't keep their legs together, not knowing they had fallen into a trap. Polaris directly used her mutant ability to pull the guards' gunslings, making them float in the air. The other guard immediately pulled the trigger, but unfortunately, guns and bullets had to obey Polaris. She then controlled the guard, making him fly over to interrogate him. But this guard clearly didn't want to cooperate, so he had to be forced. "Let's see if I can help you remember." She loosened the strap a bit. "He needs to breathe." Although she got the answer she wanted, Polaris couldn't be happy. With just a few of them, trying to save their kind was certainly a fantasy. But there are always more solutions than problems. From the mutant children, she decided to select a few with potential and give them extra training. It's just that her selection method was truly overwhelming. 3, 2. Clearly, Polaris was not satisfied with their reaction speed. In the end, she only chose 3. The first to be chosen was Wes. As his name suggests, he could create illusions to confuse sight and hearing, a decent support. The other two were a brother and sister duo. The sister, Lauren, could compress air molecules into a shield that could increase its hardness, while her brother, Andy, was the opposite of his sister. He could break air molecules. But since his power had just awakened, it was inconsistent. The most powerful of the three was Andy. Soon the children received their first mission. Andy followed Eclipse to steal data. Lauren and Wes, under Polaris's command, were responsible for support and retreat. But before the assault team reached the location, they encountered a traffic police checkpoint. If they were discovered now, the mission would be ruined. At this moment, the experienced veteran Eclipse thought of a way. He used his mutant ability to absorb all the light on the roof of the van. The van was suddenly plunged into darkness. Even the flashlight in the police officer's hand was affected. Just as the officer wanted to check the van, he received an urgent mission. They luckily escaped and smoothly arrived at the mission location. Now, it was up to Andy. He placed his hands on the wall, which immediately began to crack and disintegrate. Then, with a pull, he created a large hole in the wall. They immediately split up. Under the commander's guidance, they easily reached the data storage. Eclipse used light energy to open the machine's casing and took out the hard drive inside. They also found the mutants' records, but they were discovered by the guards. They didn't dare to delay. After burning all the data, they immediately retreated. However, the police had set up a roadblock waiting for them. Next was the support team's show. Polaris informed Eclipse that no matter what happened, he should not stop the vehicle. Although Eclipse had doubts, he chose to trust her unconditionally. The driver, receiving the order, ignored the obstacles ahead and floored the gas. The police, seeing their warning was ineffective, ordered them to open fire. Seeing the police firing, Polaris knew the time was right. She used all her strength to block the entire barrage of bullets. Lauren followed, creating an air shield under the truck. The truck flew up, breaking through the dense police encirclement. At this point, Polaris had reached her limit but still did her best to block the rain of bullets aimed at the truck, ensuring the assault team landed safely. Although they escaped, now was not the time to relax. Wes immediately used his mutant ability, creating an illusion that made the truck split in two. The police, seeing this, quickly split into two groups to chase them. Which truck should they chase? It turned out, the real truck had always been driving straight ahead. It must be said he was quite clever. Even Polaris had to look at him with new eyes. But unfortunately, when they went to rescue their kind, they discovered a spy among them. The short-haired girl, seeing her cover was blown, directly attacked, kicking Thunderbird several meters away. This person was very fast, like a flash of lightning, and had already taken down more than half of the rescue team. Even someone as agile as Thunderbird was overpowered by her. Eclipse's lasers were fast enough, but his hand speed was a fatal weakness. He could only place 2 laser beams and, with Blink's spatial teleportation assistance, move Thunderbird above her head to knock her out with one punch. With their coordinated efforts, they finally subdued the short-haired girl. This was a wake-up call for everyone. Just one traitor was this hard to deal with. If they didn't find the cause, they would be finished sooner or later. But here was the problem. The short-haired girl's speed was extremely fast. Dreamer's knockout gas couldn't catch up with her. Even if she could be made to inhale it, it would be quickly metabolized. Polaris used simple force, manipulating a knife to fly up and corner her. But her mental state was clearly unstable. She couldn't understand what Polaris was saying. Just then, Eclipse noticed something. He recognized the short-haired girl as a drug addict. Perhaps they could use her withdrawal symptoms to make her comply. No sooner said than done. Andy used his power to corner her. Lauren used an air shield to restrain her movements. The doctor took the opportunity to inject a sedative. Eclipse placed the unconscious short-haired girl on an iron bed. Polaris used her powers to tighten the iron bars. At this time, their allies also found the short-haired girl's file. It turned out she was also a pitiable person. Her daughter was seriously ill and taken to the hospital, but the hospital wouldn't admit mutants. She went to confront the director and was taken away by a Sentinel organization and transformed into her current state. She had a home she couldn't return to, and a mouth she couldn't speak with. Polaris could see she desperately wanted to express herself, so she called Esme Frost to probe her thoughts. Esme saw a laboratory inside which were many transformed mutants. Just as she wanted to delve deeper, it suddenly stopped, because the short-haired girl had died from poison. This deeply affected Polaris. After all, she was about to become a mother. Every time the baby kicked, it affected the surrounding magnetic field, triggering metal riots. If it was during the day, Polaris could control it a little, but at night, she could only pray. But what she feared came true. She had a nightmare. In her dream, she entered a laboratory. The further she went, the more she feared, because every cell held one of her kind, and each one had a gloomy expression. The uncomfortable feeling made her walk faster. In one cage, she saw her boyfriend who was with her. "Marcos, what's wrong?" But her boyfriend's mind was gone. At that moment, a baby's cry came from the side. Polaris walked over and saw it was her own unborn child. So, in real life and in her dream, she simultaneously lost control. "Quick, Lorna, it's just a dream." The baby is in the lab." "No, the baby is in your belly." Under her boyfriend's comfort, Polaris finally calmed down. But what they didn't know was that it wasn't a nightmare, but the truth that was about to happen, because Dr. Campbell had proposed the Hound Project. Once the project was approved, mutants would become legal test subjects. To sabotage the meeting's progress, they ambushed the route they had to take, waiting for fate to arrive. Not long after, a luxury car approached from a distance. A teammate suddenly rushed out to block its path. Polaris manipulated a goo-like substance to fly and hit its tires. The man, seeing this, immediately locked the car doors, but he would soon find it was futile. Thunderbird ripped the door off with one pull and forcibly took him to a safe room. Unexpectedly, even at death's door, he was still defiant. "We will exterminate you like cockroaches. You don't deserve to breathe the same air as humans. You don't want to breathe the same air as us? Then don't breathe at all." The words had just left her mouth when he felt a sense of suffocation. His previous words had thoroughly angered Esme. Just as she was about to send him to his maker, she was stopped by a teammate who reminded her to focus on the bigger picture. Fortunately, Esme knew what was more important. After letting him rest for a moment, she began to hypnotize him. "Hello, I am Franklin. I want to change my security personnel." "Of course, Mr. Franklin." Finally, They disguised themselves as his bodyguards and successfully infiltrated the meeting, preparing to capture the ringleader. Blink opened a spatial portal. Eclipse and 2 female members led the charge. Polaris was responsible for jamming the radio frequencies. At this moment, the phones of all attendees became blocks of metal. Her boyfriend's side received the news from Polaris and immediately took action. Thunderbird activated his senses and learned Dr. Campbell's location was on the 3rd floor. They immediately set up an ambush at the elevator door. When Campbell left the elevator, Eclipse directly used his powers to blind everyone. But unexpectedly, among them was also a mutant who canceled out Eclipse's power. Fortunately, Thunderbird was quick and swiftly dealt with the guards. Now only Dr. Campbell was left, but he unexpectedly grabbed a child as a human shield. Eclipse was in a dilemma, unable to attack. He could only watch as he retreated into the elevator. "Hit me, Lightman!" Watching his prey escape, Eclipse was both anxious and angry. Unexpectedly, 3 armed security guards appeared from behind. Needless to say, it was a standoff. Fortunately, Thunderbird was impervious to blades and guns, using his body to protect Blink, who hadn't had time to escape. But this wasn't a long-term solution. They could only retreat first. But the police wouldn't let them go so easily. Seeing them getting closer, Polaris took action. Finally, they escaped and returned safely. But Polaris became even more uneasy. She knew very well how cruelly they treated mutants. Now she couldn't even protect herself. How could she raise a child? If she was as kind as her boyfriend, it would only make the enemy push further. She decided to use her own methods to build a better world, a place where they didn't have to hide. So she went to Campbell's private airport, preparing to cause an aviation incident. At this point, Polaris had completely turned to the dark side. Even a celestial king couldn't change her decision. "Honey, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about. I have to do this. Please don't come here." "No, don't get agitated. Please listen to me. There must be another way. I don't care about the X-Men. I don't care about the mutant underground. I only care about my family." "Me too. But I'm tired of running. It's time to build a new world." "Don't, Lorna, please. This is your captain speaking. Please fasten your seatbelts. The plane is experiencing turbulence and is preparing for an emergency landing." "Don't do this." By the time her boyfriend looked up again, Polaris was gone. The other mutants' base was also surrounded by sentinels. Fortunately, the students Polaris had trained each had their own special skills, activating their powers to block their advance, buying precious time for everyone to retreat. But unexpectedly, the enemy also had mutants who, in a flash, easily repelled everyone. They were clearly products of the Hound program. Everyone knew they couldn't win and retreated, leaving Andy and Lauren behind. Their hands were clasped together, while their other hands emitted a golden light that was hard to approach. But the Hounds didn't retreat. They advanced, because they had no concept of life or death. After the golden light radiated, the entire mutant base began to crack and completely turned into nothingness. Besides the 2 siblings, no one survived. Unexpectedly, after all of Eclipse's preparations, they still reached a dead end. Just as they were discussing what to do next, the dark-sided Polaris appeared. She summoned everyone to create a new world with her. Her boyfriend, who had always been on her side, was the first to refuse. Polaris didn't force him. After all, people have their own will. But what Polaris didn't expect was that Andy chose to side with her. Then 3 more people joined. The so-called "those with different paths cannot work together." Perhaps parting ways was the best outcome. A few months later, Polaris's due date arrived. She just had a slight stomachache, and the next second, a 6-ton car was pulled over. Her comrades were scared by this sight, but Polaris was used to it. "Sorry, baby, gave me a good kick." Just a little movement during pregnancy caused such a big commotion. What would happen during labor? To be safe, her comrades rented a military base for her. The walls were 56 meters thick with reinforced concrete. Even bullets wouldn't scratch them, but that was far from enough. They still had to build a delivery room in the stronghold. Even industrial glass was shipped from China to completely isolate it from metal. But man proposes, God disposes. That night, Polaris felt a stomach pain. Looking at the flickering lights around, she knew the baby couldn't wait any longer. The bigger problem was that the metal outside the delivery room hadn't been cleared yet. After Polaris arrived, the delivery room immediately became a danger zone. Anything with a hint of metal was uncontrollably drawn towards her. Everyone didn't dare to be careless and quickly moved Polaris into the delivery room. And then, the birthing process was enough to shock mothers all over the world. She unintentionally triggered her powers, which was deadly enough. Not only did it interfere with the electrical system in the delivery room, but also outside the base. Eventually, the entire city's power grid started to go haywire. But no matter how hard Polaris pushed, the baby wouldn't come out. With each of her screams, the metal outside seemed to be summoned, rushing towards Polaris as if welcoming a new king. But this new king was a bit embarrassed. After it was all over, Polaris suffered from a difficult birth. At this point, the bones in her body felt like they were falling apart. The pain caused her blood pressure to rise, and she was gradually losing consciousness. The doctor said she wasn't going to make it and told everyone to prepare. Riva begged the doctor to find a way to save her, but the doctor couldn't do anything because the cause of the difficult birth was not physiological, but psychological. In other words, she had lost the will to live. At this critical moment, Riva thought of a way. She had the three Esme sisters activate their powers to enter Polaris's brain and create an illusion where mutants and humans lived in peace. In the illusion, everything was glorious. Polaris stood in the center, enjoying the glory of the new era. At this moment, a tender cry came from behind. "Mommy." Polaris excitedly hugged her little girl. Finally, they could live in the light. Family love is the greatest strength. It reawakened Polaris's will to live. This time she was no longer afraid. She remembered her original purpose, remembered what she was fighting for. When everything quieted down, Polaris finally gave birth smoothly. Mother and child were safe. Looking at the baby's tender face, a sense of happiness naturally filled her heart. Polaris named the baby Dawn. Her comrades were also moved by this warm scene and smiled at each other. But Polaris, a first-time mother, didn't know how to take care of her child. Dawn kept crying in her arms. Just then, Esme saw and wanted to take a look. She used her superpower on the baby. The hypnotized Dawn immediately quieted down. Of course, Polaris didn't know this and thought it was her own doing. But one time in an elevator, Esme accidentally hummed a couple of lines of a lullaby. The song made Polaris suspicious. This lullaby was one she only sang to Dawn when they were alone. Knowing her daughter's brain had been invaded, Polaris became enraged and directly used her powers to suspend Esme in the air. She didn't want her daughter to grow up under someone else's manipulation. At this moment, the elevator door opened but was forcibly closed by Polaris. Today, no one's plea would work. "If you or your sisters ever lay a finger on my daughter again, I will kill you." Just as Polaris was about to teach her a lesson, she was stopped by Riva's power. The situation was still unclear, and she was afraid Polaris would do something she'd regret. Polaris knew they were all on the same side, but she couldn't easily attack and could only stay by Dawn's side day and night. Everyone says that when a woman has a child, her body's functions seem to become stronger. Polaris was no exception. At night, even the slightest movement from the baby would wake her from a deep sleep. But what she feared most happened. Dawn had a high fever that wouldn't go down, making Polaris extremely anxious. "Help! Anyone! I need help!" The doctor's examination revealed that Dawn had severe jaundice. Compounded by her mutant genes, normal light therapy was ineffective. The plan now was to find the baby's father for treatment through his superpowers. Riva knew this was a good opportunity to win Polaris over, so she sent Esme to find him, conveniently resolving the misunderstanding between the two of them. A single stone to hit two birds. Soon, Esme brought Eclipse. He gently held his daughter, his eyes full of love. Hearing his daughter's name, His emotions became even more mixed because dawn in Spanish means aurora, just like the crystallization of their love. But now was not the time to think about those things. He quickly used his superpower, using light to clear the illness from his daughter's body. Soon, Dawn's skin color returned to normal. Hearing the doctor say the baby was completely fine, Polaris finally breathed a sigh of relief. But at this moment it seemed she and Eclipse would be separated again because their ideals were different, and they couldn't be partners. It wasn't until Eclipse handed Polaris a handmade gift for their daughter that he regretted letting her leave in the first place, preparing to take his wife and child away. Unexpectedly, Riva suddenly appeared. Eclipse's superpower was useless against Riva's powerful scream, but he didn't give up, trying to attack with his other hand, but the result was not what he wanted. He was hit by his own power's backlash, and finally driven out by them. Completely disappointed, Eclipse drank the last drop of wine, then smashed the bottle, constantly replaying Polaris's voice in his head. What was the first thing you wanted to do when you discovered your power? Not bad. He mimicked his original form, directing all his power towards Polaris's location. He could only use this method to convey his feelings to them. The brilliant light pierced the night. Polaris stared blankly at this scene. It's not that she didn't miss him, but for her daughter's future she had to be more ruthless. Turning donuts into fried rice was this girl's superpower, but she didn't notice the greedy eyes of her parents. She was happily eating breakfast, unaware that she had been sold by her father for $5,000 to a mutant laboratory. The girl couldn't believe this was true until she saw the stern look in her father's eyes. Only then did she belatedly realize. She wanted to run, but she couldn't. Just like that, they held her, putting a power-dampening collar on her hands. Although she had innate mutant abilities, she couldn't escape her parents' betrayal. How ironic. Just like that, she became a guinea pig in the lab, suffering torture every day. By chance, Polaris, on a mission, rescued the girl. But the once smiling girl had now become sensitive and insecure, refusing to use her powers in front of others and not daring to trust anyone. Since being rescued, she hadn't said a word. If she continued to be this withdrawn, no one could help her. How many years? Was she locked up? That's right, imagine what's going on in her head. We don't need to imagine. We can see for ourselves. Then, Esme used her powers to try to understand the girl, but the result was worse than imagined. Tie her tighter. If that doesn't work, break her arm. It's enough to knock her out. Stop it. Like this? Unbelievable. Everyone thought she was a lost cause. Only Andy refused to give up. At night, he went to the girl's room. First, he used his power to break a tennis ball. Seeing he had caught her attention, he spoke to her with many sincere words. Under Andy's, heartfelt persuasion, the girl also let down her guard. She raised her hand and the tennis ball was flipped inside out. My name is Andy. I'm Rebecca. Then Andy took her to eat hamburgers. She ate 2 in one go. Perhaps her taste buds were satisfied, so her mood improved. Andy asked about the principle of her superpower. Rebecca didn't hide it. With a light force, a soda can was flipped inside out. She then explained that since birth, she could reverse the space of objects. Then she used ketchup to write a word. When she opened her hand, the letters were instantly flipped. It was Andy's name. Andy found it magical. Just then, a police car arrived. Rebecca decided to go big. When the police got out, she immediately used her power, causing the police car to flip inside out. Are you crazy? That's the police. I know, I hate the police. Your turn. Andy didn't want to cause trouble with her, but he couldn't refuse her pleas. He used both hands to pull, and the police car instantly disintegrated with a loud explosion, becoming a pile of scrap metal. When they returned to the base, they were still excited. Their feelings for each other developed quickly. Unable to resist, they kissed. After that, Rebecca became happier and happier. Her powers also became more proficient. A safe several feet thick could be flipped with a command, and her coordination with her teammates became more and more seamless. Andy waved his hand and knocked down 4 simulated guards rushing towards them, while the rain of bullets from behind was all blocked by Polaris, one by one. Finally, Rebecca finished it. First, she changed the direction of the guards, then raised her hand, and the space was simultaneously distorted, easily resolving the battle. Soon, they received their first mission. But looking at their bold appearance, it didn't look like they were robbing a bank. The first to resist were the guards, but as soon as they raised their guns, they were forcibly restrained by Esme. All right, they had the right to be arrogant, but the more arrogant part was yet to come. Polaris raised her hand and all the electronic devices short-circuited. The security personnel in the room, seeing this, directly drew their guns and quickly pulled the triggers. But in front of Polaris, bullets were a joke. Then Riva opened her mouth and a sonic scream instantly echoed throughout the room. Even if they covered their ears, it was useless. One by one, they fell to their knees. Polaris took the opportunity to take all their weapons, easily controlling one floor of the bank. Then, they divided the work. Riva told everyone to go to the conference room. Esme used her powers to control the director and make him confess the crimes of exploiting mutants for many years. The three of them went down to the vault. Polaris forced open the elevator door to the vault below. Next was Rebecca's show. Now just flipping the vault was all that was needed. It seems it won't flip, because the thickness of the vault exceeded the range of her power. She tried several times to no avail. At this moment, Andy thought of a way, telling Rebecca to remember her first time in the lab. A moment later, suffering, anger, loneliness, despair, all kinds of emotions rose to her head. She finally exploded, gathering all her unwillingness in her hands. The space was constantly distorted, emitting a powerful force that knocked the three of them to the ground. Looking back, the vault no longer looked the same. The sense of release made her ecstatic. But this was also the beginning of a tragic end. Just as they were about to retreat, the director, still muttering, immediately infuriated Rebecca. She thought punishing them like this was not enough. She ignored everyone's advice and directly used her superpower. A layer of space simultaneously appeared in the conference room, enveloping it. The next second, the whole world suddenly fell silent. "Rebecca, what have you done?" But Rebecca showed no remorse, instead smiling sinisterly. But Riva was so hurt because her fiancé was also inside. A sense of hatred stabbed her heart. On the way to escape, Polaris only criticized her a little, and Rebecca became angry, thinking that in their eyes, she was just a tool. She then used her superpower to directly flip the car door and leave. Later, a body with a strange shape appeared on the road. This was clearly Rebecca's work. But her retribution came quickly. "Dare to move and I'll kill you." Just like that, she was trapped in a cube. The cube constantly rotated, weakening her sense of direction, making it impossible to use her power. Clearly, all of this was Riva's doing. If not for keeping her alive for some use, Rebecca would have been dead by now. Andy couldn't bear to see her suffer and went to Riva to plead, but Riva advised him to mind his own business. Little did she know, Andy was also stubborn and directly used his power to break the cube, intending to run away with Rebecca. But when he heard what she said, Andy regretted it because she wanted to kill everyone. Just as Andy wanted to persuade her, the elevator door opened. Rebecca raised her hands, intending to kill everyone like in the bank. At the critical moment, Andy timely used his power to stop Rebecca's action. But unexpectedly, he used too much force. After Rebecca slid a few meters, her head hit a pillar and she died on the spot. "Rebecca, she's not breathing, somebody help!" Having killed his lover with his own hands, Andy was in immense pain. He didn't understand why Rebecca was so stubborn. Polaris told him she herself had been tortured by experiments. Even if you go in with a sound mind, you will come out with trauma and resentment. And the main culprit was that restraining collar and the company that produced it. Now was the time to end it all. She would also use tougher methods to destroy all of humanity's crimes. Polaris led her student Andy to the headquarters of the restraining collar. Hundreds of servers appeared before their eyes, and behind each server represented the suffering of their kind. She thought of the days she was controlled by the restraining collar, and Polaris couldn't contain the hatred in her heart. She slowly floated into the air, then unleashed all her power, disabling all the collars connected to it. And the mutants who had suffered deeply from it could also break free from their shackles, revealing a long-lost smile. Andy didn't back down either. With his angry roar, all the servers exploded. At this moment, mutants all over the world removed their restraining collars. They had been oppressed for so long and were now given a new life. But what Polaris didn't expect was that this not only benefited the innocent but also the real criminals. Each of them possessed special skills. One could heat up objects, one could teleport objects, and one could directly make objects explode. The three of them had once used this combination of skills to kill thousands of people. Polaris couldn't understand why Riva wanted to recruit these heinous criminals. Faced with Polaris's questioning, Riva didn't answer directly but showed her a news clip. A king opened his mouth and said, "Mutants were all beasts and didn't deserve to live." Then she told Polaris that if you want to rebuild the world, you must first destroy the world. Therefore, she had to destroy the human government. But of course, Riva's ideals completely violated the original intention of forming the team. If this group was allowed to do as they pleased, then neither humans nor mutants would ever be at peace. To sabotage Riva's plan, Polaris, when no one was paying attention, intentionally injured her arm. Then, using the excuse of treating her wound, she secretly snuck into the camera room. Using her superpower to crack the password, she found a recording of a man named Max leaving. She discovered he often went to a bar to buy alcohol, so she secretly contacted her boyfriend Eclipse, telling him to kidnap Max. By separating one person from the group of three, they could affect Riva's destructive plan. But the result was not as desired. Due to Max's stubborn resistance, the kidnapping plan turned into an assassination. When Riva learned of Max's death, she was furious. She ordered the entire base to be locked down to find the mole before taking action. Very quickly, they checked that computer. "What did you guys find?" "We know who the mole is." But unexpectedly, the person Esme named was not Polaris, but the one with the strongest mind. Cracking the code was a small matter for her. Plus, since Esme couldn't enter her brain, there was no way to prove her innocence. Just like that, she became the scapegoat for Polaris, constantly being crushed by Riva's sonic scream until she died. The death was like a stone dropped into the ocean, not even causing a ripple. Only Polaris's head felt like it would explode. Seeing Andy's face as calm as water, Polaris felt even more regretful, regretting bringing him here in the first place, this place devoid of humanity. So she told him Riva's entire plan. "You mean everything Riva said was a lie? Rebecca died for a liar? Andy, we can stop her. We just need you to come with me." Fortunately, Andy still had some conscience and decided to join forces with Polaris to stop Riva's plot. But unfortunately, it wasn't long before Esme found Andy. The two siblings wanted to resist but were controlled by Esme's mind control, taking them to the Sentinel services. Then, the three sisters used their powers to force the two siblings to destroy an entire large building. By the time they regained their senses, the place had turned to ashes. Polaris was a step too late. What was more terrible was that Esme also wanted them to kill each other. At the critical moment, Polaris unexpectedly disrupted one of the three sisters. While their power was distracted, Eclipse immediately knocked down the other two, successfully saving the siblings. But now was not the time to celebrate. The urgent task was to eliminate Riva. But it was not as easy as it sounded. You have to know that Riva's power was not just a simple sonic scream. She could make others unable to control their own powers, even unable to think. When everyone was at a loss, Andy's father bravely stepped up, saying he could handle it all. He gave his wife a deep kiss and resolutely went to face Riva. Riva didn't expect them to send such a useless person, and immediately opened her mouth, preparing to send him to his doom. The man immediately felt a splitting headache, but he didn't retreat, instead stepping closer to Riva. It turned out he could never control his superpower. The angrier he got, the stronger his power became. You could say he was Riva's nemesis. It just required sacrificing his life to die together. Then, a loud explosion occurred, and the entire base was destroyed along with it. Not long after Reva's death, peace was restored for the mutants. Finally, Polaris could reunite with her loved ones and enjoy moments of happiness she had never known before. Today's story ends here. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel to support us. Goodbye, and see you again.